I think we're going to start. Thank you. Ruben, are you ready? No, we're good. We're going to start the press conference now. Just like you're used to being like a team. Can I use that? Do you want to? No, you want me to stand beside you right now? Yeah. Lucy. Okay. We good? We'll just do two. Yeah.
When I started this fight against the pipeline, I didn't need glasses. So I blame it on the whale. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you, hey CM, Hoichka CM, Siaya, Hoichka Che CM. Thank you, my beloved relations, for coming today on behalf of my two nations. My dad is from Squamish and my mom from Tsleil-Waututh, and I have lots of relatives out in Musqueam that we welcome here in the traditional Coast Salish territory. That was one verse of my grandfather's song, Chief Dan George. He given that song up to the Coast Salish people as our anthem. So it's fitting that we share it here today, but just want to welcome you and thank you all for coming and wanting to create change and look at our future. So no further ado, I'm going to start right here, right now. I'm here today to welcome you to the future. Our people have taken care of the lands, the waters since time immemorial, and part of that work is taking care of our future as well. The future you are visiting today has been co-created by all of us here. It is our resistance, it is our expression of our collective dreams, our collective imagination. Our imagination is a powerful force. It is a source of renewable energy. Its power empowers our struggle against ongoing colonialism, against the theft of our lands, against the so-called economy that looks at our Mother Earth and sees only resource to turn into money. Our imagination is a conductor like lightning. It opens up the channel to the sacred words of spirit, and through prayer and ceremony infuse our daily actions on the earth with meaning and power. And that is what today is about, a new ritual to conjure up a future powered by the health force imagination, painted infinite colors of care. You know the phase, just transition, still isn't familiar to most people who live on this land, and it's true. And those who know the term in a bit jargon is supposed to reassure workers in the oil and gas sector that they will be taken care of, to shift to renewable, to confirm the climate emergency, to confront, the climate emergency. But the task that faces humans today is much greater than just changing our energy source. That poisons to deal much greater than the greenhouse gases in the air. Our lives and systems today are out of balance. We see that, we know that, we feel that. They are rooted in principles of selflessness and emergency is here right now. Right now it is here. Because of the colonial ideas that people can inflict harm on earth for centuries, and there will never be any consequences, but we're living those consequences now. That is why our collective religious and spiritual beliefs that are the teachings of humanity, of love and honor and respect and dignity, pride, compassion and understanding and truth and wisdom. Lessons, when we are that in these lessons, we'll make better choices for ourselves, for our lands, for our waters, and for our future generations. We will do that. So, with the work, just transition involves a whole lot more than one group of workers in the industry. The real meaning of just transition is transformation of ourselves, our society, from economy of dominance and extraction to one base for caring for Earth and caring for each other. That's what that is. That's why I am so happy to be with you all today, fighting for a world based on a whole different set of values that we need immediately. This press conference today may be an act of imagination, but that's where we are now. That's where we need to start. We need to have to tell a new story, and we have to dream of it and be it and make it a reality. And so with that, welcome to the future. Welcome to the future. It is worth fighting for. Our future generations, we see young people that we have to make better choices for. So thank you very much. Now let's fast forward now to 2025, and I'll turn it over to my friend, the Minister of Just Transition and the Climate Emergency Coalition, my good friend, my brother, does an amazing good work for our future and for lands and waters and people. Avi Lewis.
All right, brother. Thank you, Ruben. Thank you, Ruben. Thank you for your leadership, for your generosity, and for welcoming us to do this work on these lands. And welcome all to the Just Transition Ministerial Update 2025. Thank you. I want to start with a land acknowledgement that suits the times. It is with humility that your climate emergency coalition government acknowledges the keepers of these lands, the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. And it is with pride that we announce today that the Government of Canada and the people of British Columbia and Vancouver are finally paying taxes to the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. That's right. We are finally getting serious about being good guests on these lands, and every level of government is paying rent to the rights and title holders. Of course, this is not just a financial relationship. You will hear much more about the social programs, the physical infrastructure, the stewardship of nature, and the many other ways in which we are engaged in the work of repairing relationships. These are just a few of the many accomplishments we're here to celebrate today from the past few years of massive change in our society. And they have been exciting years. Just think back, if you can, to 2022, and it is stunning how fast everything has changed. That year, 2022, started, of course, with an historic political emergency, quickly overtaken by war, and then the unforgettable cascade of natural disasters that led to that famous snap election and the forming of the Climate Emergency Coalition Government. A government which has brought unity and solidarity back to our political discourse and made so many positive changes in just 36 short months. And it is important to put our just transition process in this context. This is not a dry policy exercise dominated by advisory panels of experts, or a series of government programs imposed from Ottawa merely to lower the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This is a collective undertaking to change everything about how we live, how we move around, how we feed ourselves, how we earn a living, how we take care of the earth and each other. We are leaving behind an economy that traps most of us in dead-end jobs that gig and dig, while a tiny elite rakes in cartoonish profits. Instead, we are sharing the wealth and protecting the health of people and planet. We are building a future based on care and repair, and we're all part of it. This is not just the work of your government, this is the work of all of us. When we began this process back in 2022, we started with a great stock taking, the national inventory process. Bear with me, there's going to be a lot of nerding out today. It's a press conference. In keeping with our mandate for sweeping change, we carefully studied all of the conditions and capacities of our advanced industrial economy. We took stock of all the factories, the power grids, and industrial systems. But just as importantly, we took stock of the vulnerable communities, the marginalized people, the sick, the underemployed, the support systems in disrepair from decades of austerity. We conducted an inventory of our conversion needs to determine how many heat pumps, how many solar arrays, how many wind farms, how many electric buses we needed to electrify virtually everything and end our reliance on fossil fuels. And then, if I don't get a cheer for this next part, I'll be very disappointed. Then we recovered the lost art of planning. We made a 3-year plan. 3-year plan. 3-year plan. That's right, 3-year plan. We made a 3-year, we don't have time for 5-year plans. We made a 3-year plan to provide all of these public goods in a way that directly addresses unemployment, structural racism, poverty, and economic inequality. Even more importantly, we emphasized the need for common purpose. Together we created a mission moment, an experiment in solidarity that could respond to the great hunger for meaning and connection and community that we heard in every corner of the land. That's right. We needed to bring the fossil fuel era to a rapid close. while taking care of workers and elders and everyday folks, not the interests of oligarchs and the profits of their giant corporations. You're also allowed to boo at press conferences in the future. And we needed to build out the 21st century housing, transit, public services, and the care economy that would ensure that this transition, unlike the chaotic market collapses of recent years, that this transition would take care of everyone. So today you'll hear announcements from a number of new government bodies, public companies and agencies, and the wonderful people who lead them, all reporting to you, the public, as required in the enabling legislation on the achievements of this new period. As we say in government these days, transition is inevitable. Justice is up to us. So we start today, as we always start, with first principles and our progress on Indigenous land rights since the cancellation of the Indian Act in 2023. It is my pleasure, my honor, to introduce my colleague Doreen Manuel, chair of the Land Back Secretariat, with the latest update on the implementation of the Land Back Act. Doreen.
Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here today to share the third annual update of the Land Back Act. Since the Act was one of the measures included in the first 50 days sprint of the climate emergency coalition government, we have plenty of progress to report. After the cancellation of the racist Indian Act of 2023, the Land Back Act was introduced to reboot the relationship between Indigenous peoples and all levels of government. The work was deeply influenced by the late great Secwepemc teacher Arthur Manuel, who wrote the classic Unsettling Canada. He pointed out that as the 21st century began, settlers controlled 99.8% of Canada's lands, and Indigenous people only 0.2%. Indigenous people only 0.2% of it. We were expected to live off of that sliver. As Arthur said, with this distribution of land, you don't have to have a doctorate in economics to understand who will be poor and who will be rich. Well, we're changing that. Our goal, as stated by the Act, as passed in Parliament, is, and I quote, to reverse the land theft that underlines the colonial nation state of Canada. That means that 80% of all federal Crown land is being systematically returned to Indigenous jurisdiction. That is what transition looks like. That's what just transition looks like. Now the government understands there is some trepidation about this effort. To quote Arthur Manuel again, we obviously do not expect to throw Canadians off the land and send them back to the countries they came from. We know that for centuries Canadians have been here building their society, which despite its failings, and because of the contributions of Indigenous resources, has become the envy of many in the world. We Indigenous, even though we have faced severe injustice and been the victims of genocide and at the hands of government, accept that all Canadians have acquired a basic human right to be here. But with rights comes responsibilities. And the Land Back Secretariat is pleased to announce today that those responsibilities are now the law of the land. First and foremost is responsibility to the land itself. Land transfer to First Nations comes with robust federal incentives to accelerate renewable energy projects and slow the pace of extraction. The new Clean Up Your Mess legislation requires companies in the mining, forestry, and oil and gas industries to provide much higher upfront cleaning deposits, so the polluter pays first principle is guaranteed in advance. As the minister mentioned, Indigenous nations are now paid property tax for the use of our land by all three levels of colonial government. And now that even the most remote Indigenous communities have a solid tax base and other revenues, we are seeking the renaissance of healthy families, healthy clans, and healthy nations. This includes health and wellness programming for services which are lowering the unemployment rate, the incarceration rate, and the number of children in Indigenous community care. As you'll hear later in this update, we're also seeing zero-emission housing built, roads paved, and of course, safe drinking water flowing in every community in the land. Now, there is much left to do, but the Land Back Secretariat is on a roll. I'm happy to end my remarks today with an official announcement. Here in the province that has been known as British Columbia, the Renaming Roundtable has begun its consultation on a new name. Thank you. And I now hand it over to my colleague, Christine Boyle, head of the Department of Universal Housing.
Thank you, Doreen, and good morning, everyone. Let's start by remembering where we were just 3 years ago. In 2002, we faced a full-blown housing emergency. Left to the market, house prices had ballooned beyond all reason. Houses were no longer treated as places to live, but as profit centers for speculators and real estate corporations. Our communities were becoming more and more segregated, with sprawling neighborhoods for the wealthy and limited space for the rest of us. Renters faced not only ridiculously escalating rents, but the constant grinding stress of looming renoviction and the horror of being tossed into an impossible rental market. And working families lucky enough to own homes through the fortune of timing or family help were nevertheless seeing friends and neighbors squeezed out of their home communities. You'll notice one word that keeps popping up in what I'm describing: the market. The housing emergency was, among things, a failure of the market. Our system has put its faith in the market to provide one of the most basic human necessities, a roof over our heads, and it was a catastrophe. Housing in 2022 was characterized by inequality, vulnerability, racism, and an epidemic of houselessness, all the conflict, stress, and social division that followed it. And then the climate emergency coalition government got to work. The Department of Universal Housing focused first on the big solution, a public option for housing. Housing is, as we know, a human right and not a source of profit. Backstopped by the Government of Canada and accelerated by new legislation, we launched the Great Buyback, purchasing existing rental buildings and bringing them into community ownership. That allowed us to bring in the rent reboot, freezing or lowering rents across hundreds of thousands of units all over Canada and locking those lower rents in for good. We worked closely with the Public Goods Corporation of Canada and the Association of Community Retrofit Cooperatives. We supplied and supported communities to get buildings off of gas, installing solar systems, heat exchangers, and district heating for whole neighborhoods. All of this economic activity reduced inequality, strengthened local webs of care and relationship, and of course, created good local union jobs at every stage of manufacturing and installation. Now, perhaps the most controversial of our early moves was the Monster to Multifamily Home Program. We took a look at the homes that were sitting empty, and we purchased a significant portion of them. Bringing them into public ownership meant that instead of being empty holes in the hearts of communities, these properties became places for local workers and families to call home. And in partnership with provincial and local governments, we have been building new mixed-income co-op and non-market housing throughout neighborhoods, in cities, suburbs, and rural areas. Makes me a bit weepy thinking about all the work we've done these last 3 years. And while we are still in court fighting a few disgruntled billionaires, we savor the gratitude of the thousands of families who have secure housing and are bringing new vibrancy to the schools, small businesses, and safe streets around them. Connection to active transportation has been key as well. In just 3 years, more than 1 million new residents across the land have moved into affordable, mixed-income communities. Neighbors have easy access to all the places they rely on and that enrich their lives. For all these folks, it's just a short ride, glide, or roll to get to work, to get the kids to school, to pick up groceries, or to unwind in libraries and green spaces. For us at the Department of Universal Housing, our just transition mission is clear. We strengthen our connection, we strengthen our collective sense of safety and belonging. We weave living webs of connection. It has been an honor to say to so many, welcome home. Thank you very much, and now I'd like to call on Commissioner Allison Gu of the Clean Transit Without Delay Commission.
Good morning. Before we begin, please excuse the cast. As chair of the Clean Transit Without Delay Commission, I personally test all of our new initiatives, including our new municipal cargo hover sled fleet. Not to worry, I will be sending them back to the drawing board. There's a bit of work to do on the safety. Many of the speakers have recalled just how bad things were 3 years ago, and that is certainly the case with transportation too. Back in 2022, gas prices hit an all-time high, and more folks were aware than ever before of our dependence on fossil fuels just to move around. We realized too that the burden of transportation costs was not distributed evenly. Far too many working class and poor people lived in areas underserved by transit, were unable to afford the upfront cost of electric vehicles, and were living in neighborhoods without safe infrastructure for walking, rolling, or cycling for them or their children. And it wasn't just the monetary cost of fossil fuel transportation, it was the societal cost too. The many injuries and deaths each year from automobile crashes, the lack of clean air, the impacts of stress from noise and road rage, and the cumulative health effects of the sedentary car lifestyle. But the truth was, while previous governments refused to stand up to the fossil fuel and automobile industries, ordinary people were already developing the solutions necessary to rapidly transform transit, and in turn, transform society. Well, when the Climate Emergency Coalition government came in and struck the Clean Transit Without Delay Commission, the first thing we did was convene a mobile People's Assembly to establish 3 just transit principles. The first principle being, freedom of mobility means fully accessible, fare-free transit for all. The second principle, frequency matters. Connect all neighborhoods, even rural areas and suburbs, with rapid, frequent, and convenient service. The third principle was the one that moored the rest of our work, that the real solutions to our transportation woes already existed. I'll give you an example of how we put these principles to work. Previous governments had treated Canadian-made electric cars as a win-win, with dreams of reviving the auto industry in Quebec and Ontario while rolling out clean transportation across this land. But then we realized how many lithium, cobalt, and other mines that would require, here and around the world. And the People's Assembly decided it's not a just transition if rich countries build their new green economy on poisoning other people's lands. We returned to our principles and refocused on simple solutions at speed and at scale to create permanent change. That's why we focused on frequency, reliability, and speed of public transit, electrified our bus and rail fleets, and invested in transforming neighborhoods from car havens to safe places for people. And in rural communities, where side roads are often long, narrow, and homes are far apart, we have fleets of electric minivans operating as ride-share cooperatives. Algorithms have been replaced by good old-fashioned dispatchers, creating jobs and putting humans back in the driver's seat. For heavy freight and long-haul trucks, where there was no other option, we utilized green hydrogen made from excess renewable energy. This, in turn, has drastically brought down the price of essential goods, yet another way that life has been made more affordable for everyday folks. Today, we treat transit as a universal public service, fully funded and not for profit. And when we do this, the social benefits ripple through society in massive waves. People are slowing down even as their commutes to work speed up. With more spare time, people are spending it with loved ones, building community, and building new relationships. Our lives are simpler, more compact, and more connected. With more people on the streets, mom and pop businesses and community co-ops are thriving. Neighbors befriend each other, passerbyers connect, and entire neighborhoods collaborate. Effectively eliminating cars from many communities has revitalized them, making streets safe and thereby making them true public spaces once again. One of my favorite changes is that paved parking deserts are being restored to green spaces, making being in nature and in connection with land more accessible for so many. When beginning my role as commissioner, I knew that a century of car culture would be a hard habit to break. But what the Clean Transit Without Delay Commission has shown us is that when there is the political will to redesign the way we get around, a few years goes a very long way. To serve as commissioner has been absolutely moving. Thank you. And now I'll pass the podium to my colleague and friend Khalid Boudreau, Chair of the Police Retasking Task Force.
Thank you, Commissioner, and good morning to all. 3 years ago, so many of us felt overwhelmed with grief, sorrow, and despair. Feeling helpless as we lost thousands of our loved ones and community members to a poisoning crisis, climate disasters, and a global pandemic. Our model of public safety was failing the very people it should have been protecting, and that's why we adopted a holistic and ambitious plan to create safe and healthy communities for all. The retasking task force started by disarming street officers because we believe that the state must abide by the same nonviolent principles that it preaches to others. We created real civilian oversight, as well as strict use of force guidelines so that officers are held accountable to the communities they represent. We finally ended the era where police are above the law. We immediately ended the school liaison program so that Black and Indigenous children finally feel safe in their schools. We then reduced the bloated police budget by 10% a year, reinvesting valuable public dollars in the solutions that we know make our communities safer. Thanks to that, and in partnership with Public Goods Corporation of Canada, we finally moved to provide widespread safe supply to people who use drugs, saving thousands of lives a year. Not only that, but we've provided free N95 masks and other PPE as part of our campaign to make our communities more resilient to all respiratory viruses, not just COVID-19. One program we've been very proud to roll out has been now the fully funded mental health care system, which doesn't just help people in crisis, but is also rolling out a truly historic framework that addresses people's needs before they reach crisis levels. By providing culturally appropriate, easy to access, and free mental health services, we are now on a path towards a truly universal healthcare system. Crime rates have plummeted after our unprecedented investments in making life truly affordable for all. You've all heard about our huge advances in building hundreds of thousands of units of universal social housing. You've heard about our new, free, and truly accessible transit systems, freeing us from all the price gouging from gas companies. And we've also been rebuilding food systems that nurture both people and the land. Another major accomplishment was reforming the Police Act and Criminal Code to ensure that police are no longer used as a billy club for extractive industries. Our country was built on this power, and if we truly believe in reconciliation, we must finally put it to an end. We're now in the era of climate uncertainty, and must be solidly on the side of healing the land and our relationship to it. After 3 years of fast and transformative changes, we're well on our way to mending the harms done by over 150 years of carceral thinking. I'm so excited to work with this amazing team and continue righting the wrongs of history and building a common future, one that sparkles with our groundbreaking vision for true justice for all. And it is now my honor to introduce Cookpee Chief Judy Wilson, the chair of the Trans Mountain Pipeline Reparations and Healing Secretariat.
Waikakoitap. It's really good to be here with our new coalition government. What do you think? The end of petro government? The end of petro police? The end of petro economy? So friends, serving as the chair of the Trans Mountain Reparations and Healing Secretariat has been gratifying work. Like so many across this country, I spent many years fighting the Trans Mountain Pipeline and all the pipelines across North America, which we said would never be built. It's no surprise that the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion was a poster child for the fossil fuel era. It's not economically viable. It posed immense threats to the environment and to Indigenous title, rights and human rights. It disregarded free, prior informed consent of many nations and all the people of the lands. It endangered the safety and the welfare of Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit individuals, especially with its man camps, which research proved were directly linked to the violence against Indigenous women. Today, I am proud to tell you, and to thanks to the immense work undertaken by our Secretariat, we have made real progress in addressing the racism, the legacy of the unilateral government decisions, the climate environmental threats, and the lack of respect for Indigenous title and rights that the Trans Mountain Project once enabled. The end of that era. In just 3 years, we have canceled the pipeline and launched a far bigger and better project, reparations and healing for people and the land. Back in 2022, the federal government got news that Trans Mountain was going to cost more than $20 billion. We're not surprised at this giant price tag, but we were disgusted. The government of the day was determined to push it through against the will of the people, the communities who have defended and taken care of the land for generations since time immemorial. So it was a great day when the new Climate Emergency Coalition government, on its very first day of office, canceled Trans Mountain. And announced the Reparations and Healing Secretariat to reallocate all the public funds. All the money you invested is completely going back to the people where it belongs. We started with an initial multi-year budget that was saved from canceling Trans Mountain more than $20 billion. We quickly trained up and hired the local workers from the Indigenous communities along the pipeline route and decommissioned the pipeline. This provided an initial 3 years of trade and skill employment, union jobs with excellent benefits for those Indigenous workers. Unemployment in those communities was almost eliminated in 3 months, and the steel went to the new National Steel Repurposing Foundry, which replaced the proposed frat gas export terminal in Kitimat. While we were already following the pipeline route, we were able to remove the original pipeline as well, with huge waves of renewable energy coming online and the surge of public transit and active transportation. The 3,000 barrels of diluted bitumen a day were simply no longer needed. That was just the beginning. With the pipeline becoming a thing of the past, we moved forward to the work of repairing relationships with communities and restoring their role in governance. The Secretariat now has a network of new infrastructure projects going ahead with Indigenous communities across the prairie, the mountains to the sea. Unlike fossil fuel projects, they're all proceeding with free, prior informed consent of the Indigenous people affected along the construction. Community health centers, water treatment facilities, zero-emission housing, schools, hospitals, and treatment centers are all proceeding under the leadership of Indigenous communities. The economic boom from this redirected public funding has lifted communities out of poverty and put community members in family-sustaining jobs and addressed centuries of deep inequities in access to services and basic necessities of human life. With this money that would have gone to piping some of the worst oil in the world to the West Coast, we have instead unleashed a wave of investment in healthy people and healthy land. The road ahead remains long. There is so much more healing to do. But from a violent and harmful project that once declared in the national interest, I must add unilaterally, we have launched a constructive and healing process that is truly the interest of all living things. And in our culture, in our way, from the land is living, the water is living, all of creation is living, just as we are. So we're just starting for this work for our new coalition government. And it's now my pleasure to introduce you my colleague, the CEO of Public Goods Corporation of Canada, Anjali Aparudi. I probably said that wrong.
Hello. I'm so proud and happy to be here on behalf of this visionary coalition government. Thank you, Chair, all my colleagues, and everyone in attendance today. I'm the CEO of the Public Goods Corporation of Canada, and you're probably wondering what that is. When we designed the comprehensive 3-year Just Transition Plan back in 2022, it was clear that to rapidly decarbonize while confronting the deep inequality and systemic injustices of our times, we simply had to put our economy back in the service of people and the planet. And it was equally clear that there was an excellent, if long neglected, policy tool for achieving many of these goals: public ownership. When a corporation is publicly owned, you don't see the price gouging, serial layoffs, and relentless quest for profit above all that you see with private monopolies. And you can concentrate on maximum employment, social benefits, and getting essential goods and services into people's daily lives as quickly and cheaply as possible. The market is not designed to put people first. And when it comes to the climate emergency, it was clear many more than 3 years ago that market mechanisms like carbon pricing and offsets had utterly failed to lower emissions. Markets did, however, do a fantastic job of concentrating enormous wealth into the hands of the 1% and turning climate measures into corporate welfare scams. In other words, far from solving the climate emergency, markets turbocharged it. So, in 2022, as you've heard already today, we launched our national inventory process, identifying the key goods and services that were needed most urgently and that the market was unable to provide at the time. At the same time, at sufficient speed and scale, of course. At the same time, we identified economic assets that were underutilized, that the market didn't place value on. Idle factories, valuable metals and minerals sitting in landfills, hundreds of thousands of eager and capable workers who wanted to make a decent living and who wanted to make a real difference in their communities. And then, just like during the fight against fascism in the Second World War, we created dozens of public corporations, crown corporations, to match the needs of the just transition to all those human hands and material resources that the market had abandoned. Putting people's needs and the ecological limits of our planet at the heart of the economy changed everything. We were able to create more than 1 million jobs while rapidly decarbonizing and reducing inequality at the fastest rate we've ever seen in history. And some examples of this: in 3 years, we've produced millions of heat exchange systems that run on clean electricity, keeping families warm in the winter and cool in the summers. And thanks to the National Association of Community Retrofit Cooperatives, local workers used recycled materials to make this all possible. Yeah, public ownership in the energy industry has drastically diminished the power of fossil fuel corporations and finally put communities in charge of their own energy needs. Now, communities across the country can decide which forms of energy are suitable for them, and the Public Goods Corporation of Canada provides all the infrastructure they need, from solar panels to wind turbines to geothermal and tidal generators. Geothermal, yes! We finally saw the light. We created a huge, thriving renewable industry, and we did it not only by repurposing the materials and expertise of the fossil fuel industry, but also by applying a strong life cycle assessment to all of this infrastructure. As a huge life cycle assessment. As a huge public company, we have the market power to make sure that our supply chains are sustainable and in right relation with communities around the world. We are aiming for no more extractive industries and no more extractive practices. And in the health sector, the pandemic revealed gaping holes in how we procure and deliver medications. And that's why we made a massive public investment in rapidly scaling up domestic vaccine and pharmaceutical production. Yep. As a major producer, we threw our support behind the international movement to restructure patent agreements to expand the use of generic drugs, guaranteeing affordable medications for all, as it should be. Thanks to these and other steps, Canada's approach to safe drug supply is now emulated by other countries around the world. And with that tipping point, truly universal vaccination is already within reach. And on that note, our public corporations are leading a significant shift in Canada's global role. We're doing this by finally addressing the brutal and toxic legacy of Canadian mining corporations at home and abroad. Given the outsized impact of ruthless corporate practices on poor communities around the world, it seems fitting that these industries are now retasked to provide transport and storage infrastructure for vaccines and other medications in countless small communities in the global south. Finally, I can now reveal that the Public Goods Corporation of Canada is now in talks to purchase a major financial institution. We will have more details on this soon. But with that out of the bag, it is my pleasure to bring to the podium my fellow CEO, Seth Klein, Commissioner of a Just Transition Transfer Agency. Thank you.
I think you're all supposed to come back. Yeah, let's come back up. Yeah. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. So it is my honor today to be the last speaker, and it falls to me to answer the question hanging in the air today, just as it has been repeated by our critics throughout this historic process, and you know the one. Sounds expensive. How are we going to pay for it? I am delighted today to answer that question directly, but first let's remember how we got here. When the Climate Emergency Coalition government came to power with a mandate to not just for rapid climate action, but for sweeping climate justice, we knew that significant public expenditures would be required. And just as the pandemic, back at the beginning of this decade, taught us the cost of inaction are mass death and suffering, there really is no alternative. We have to spend what it takes to win. What does winning look like? Well, we're doing it, so we know. First, we established a rigorous, science-based carbon budget for each and every sector of the economy, and we have legislated emissions down year after year. And for the first time in our history, we've accomplished that. 3 years in a row of deep emission reductions, beating all of our targets and putting us back on track to cut our climate pollution in half in less than a decade. But winning also means leaving no one behind, especially in regions like Newfoundland and Labrador, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Northeast BC, that have long relied on revenue and jobs from oil and gas. And that's where the Just Transition Transfer comes in. With that funding from Ottawa, in just 3 years, we have established a Just Transition Agency in each province and territory, all jointly administered by all levels of government, including Indigenous nations. Those regions I just mentioned, as well as Indigenous communities across the land, have been prioritized for transfers that recognize that they have to bear the biggest burden of transition. And all of the announcements that you've heard today, housing, transit, land back, and more, the Just Transition Agencies have played a central role, convening, listening, supporting, coordinating, and vitally, funding these exciting initiatives that we're celebrating today. No longer the hollow promise of days past, the Just Transition Transfer is putting billions of dollars annually into the jobs and infrastructure we've needed and will continue to need to catapult our society into this new fossil fuel-free era. The Just Transition Transfer has backstopped a good jobs guarantee for workers in carbon-intensive industries, ensuring the promise that no one will be left behind. Through our worker-led retraining and jobs matching agency, featuring the popular Just Swipe for Job Swap app, thousands of workers have already left the fossil fuel industry and are working in other fields while continuing to earn decent unionized pay with benefits. They're decommissioning pipelines and cleaning up well sites. They're drilling geothermal energy, there you go, working in the heating and cooling industry, building high-speed rail, retrofitting and fuel swapping buildings, improving forest resilience, and of course many have switched to the booming renewables sector where worker-owned energy cooperatives are flourishing. For all of this and more, the flow of federal funding from your climate emergency coalition government has been unprecedented. Following the recommendations of the Climate Action Economic Summit, we have spent an amount equivalent to 2% of our annual GDP, some $40 billion per year for the last 3 years, and we will keep that up until we have reduced our emissions to zero. Okay, I've kept you waiting long enough. Where did all that money come from? Well, from a combination of climate quantitative easing and wealth and windfall profit taxes. With respect to the former, it was our experience in the first year of that pandemic that showed us what was possible. For most of that year, the Bank of Canada was buying up federal government securities to finance the COVID emergency response to the tune of $5 billion every week for a year. Now, once we embedded our climate emergency goals within the mandate of the Bank of Canada, the bank proceeded to do this again for a mere 4 weeks a year, generating $20 billion a year for climate and just transition programs. We've supplemented this with, as you're all familiar, the Bank of Canada's new climate bonds, which have proven highly popular and helped to finance these programs. With respect to the new tax revenues deployed, significantly, we are the first government to actually enforce the long-standing law of the land that polluters must pay. And they certainly have the means. According to the Climate Emergency Information Agency, in the Alberta oil sands alone, the oil and gas industry racked up excess profits of $677 billion between 1997 and 2018. And don't forget, the previous governments were still giving them tens of billions of dollars in corporate welfare. So when we abruptly cut all fossil fuel subsidies in 2022, that freed up considerable resources to redirect to these programs. The fossil fuel windfall tax of 2023 was another major piece of the financing pie, as was the wealth tax on accumulated assets over $5 million. The excess profits tax on emergency profiteering was one of the most popular measures of our government's first term, closing the gap easily. Most people agree that an annual profit of 10% is very reasonable for any business, especially in an emergency. And so that answers those big questions, and the Climate Emergency Coalition government is now on a sound fiscal path. And with that, I will pass it back to my boss, the Minister of Just Transition, Avi Lewis.
Thank you, Commissioner Klein. I know I shouldn't break from the script, but you may have accidentally neglected a couple of minor points, like the fact that it only took us 3 years to get to full employment in Canada, with a universal 4-day work week and a guaranteed livable annual income. I'm just pandering now. You know, when there's so much good news to share, it's inevitable that a few major announcements will just have to wait for 2026. A question for everyone here. Do you want to live in this future? Are we ready to fight for this future? Because this future that we describe here today is the work of all of us, the fruits of our imagination and struggle. And that's what we came here today to commune around, the future that we can build together. It's not going to come easily. It's not quite as easy as writing a press conference collectively. But with the imagination and the determination and the human passion, the love and energy that we have here today, I know we can do it. And I'm so grateful you came here today. I want to say a quick few thank yous to our beautiful and distinguished speakers. Thank you for all the work that you do for all living things. Thank you. They were an incredible bunch. We invited all area MPs, MLAs, and councillors. I think the only one that RSVP'd was Jean Swanson, so a special shout out there. If you've seen anyone running around with fancy little lanyards in the engagement team, thank you everyone who organized this with us. It was a big group of people, lots of organizations. Thank you for everyone who attended to the safety, inclusion, and accessibility of this event. There are a number of sound and camera professionals here who helped us share this with a wider audience. Thank you for making this ministry look slick. You did a great job. A very, very big shout out to the project manager for this event, Christine Wickner, who literally pulled it all together. And most importantly, thanks for all of you who came here in person, everyone who watched online, thank you for being part of this unforgettable day. And let's say it one more time. Transition is inevitable. Justice is up to all of us. Thank you for coming. And now, to return us to the present, in a joyous spirit of celebration, let's just transition to a funked up tune by the world famous Carnival Band.